Proceed.
Hi, my name's John Reilly. I live in North Kingstown, 56 Mountain Laurel Way. And I've lived in the state for 14 years. With your permission, I'd like to read a statement from my 16-year-old daughter before I make my own comments.
Certainly.
My daughter Megan Reilly is a junior at North Kingstown High School. She volunteers as a tutor in South Providence on Thursdays and couldn't be here tonight. She's also a devout Christian, a leader in her church youth group, and an accomplished cellist. I'm very proud of her. A statement in support. Marriage is a legal institution, and therefore, withholding it for religious reasons is infringement upon separation of church and state. If marriage was solely a religious process and wasn't related at all to the state, then religious organizations would have their say. However, as a state, we regulate marriages, licenses, blood tests, etc., and so, withholding such rights from legal citizens isn't fair. A religious organization has the right to deny a same-sex couple a ceremony in their facility. However, the state should not withhold legal rights due to the religious organization's homophobic members or supposed, quote, morally driven decisions. It is also an infringement on one's inalienable rights. Quote, all men are created equal, and we have the right to, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Withholding a legal process from a same-sex couple is an infringement upon their rights. That's from my 16-year-old. And now if I may make my comments. By way of full disclosure, I must tell you that I am a born-again Christian, a graduate of a Christian college, and the son of a career missionary who died and was buried in Africa doing the work God called him to do. My identity was formed in the church and to a great degree remains there. And having said that, despite the fact they may not subscribe to my apology, I apologize to the LGBT community for what I see as acidic, vitriolic comments that have been made tonight and in other forums. I apologize on behalf of the church and on behalf of all sincere Christians who are working to express Christ's love to others. Now for my comments. Firstly, I'd like to address three premises that are often suggested as a basis for denying same-sex couples the right to marry. The issue of procreation, the availability of civil unions, and the perceived adverse effects on children raised by same-sex parents. Some contend the primary goal of the marriage relationship is to have children, and therefore a same-sex couple who is unable to have children through traditional means is not anticipated. If we are to subscribe to this idea, however, we are then logically required to disallow marriage of any heterosexual couple wherein one or both are unable to have children. The oft-made argument that they may have children through non-traditional means, sperm and egg donors, surrogate mothers, and even adoption, applies equally to heterosexual and homosexual couples, and therefore cannot be used to disqualify this argument. This position also by default overlooks the plight of many children who are looking for adoptive homes. Have we the right to deny them a greater chance of joining a nuclear family due to our being unwilling to apply the protection of and the security of marriage to same-sex couples? I would also caution that this position can imply that a child that is not conceived in the traditional marriage is by default less intentional, and therefore by extension of lesser worth. Whether tacit or not, this implication once again violates our foundational truth that all men are created equal. With regard to civil unions, there are significant differences between civil unions and marriages with regard to the rights afforded under both state and federal law. The differences are well documented and are particularly significant on the federal level. Being respectful of your time, I will not elaborate. However, civil unions are not equivalent to marriage. As to the perception that being raised by same-sex parents has a negative effect on a child's health and well-being, I would draw your attention to the statement issued by the American Academy of Pediatrics today. It can be found in the press and also on their website. And I quote, "The American Academy of Pediatrics supports civil marriage for same-gender couples, as well as full adoption and foster care rights for all parents, regardless of sexual orientation, as the best way to guarantee benefits and security for our children." Quote, "Children thrive in families that are stable and that provide permanent security, and the way we do that is through marriage," said Benjamin Siegel, chair of the Committee on Psychosocial Aspects of Child and Family Health and co-author of the policy statement. He goes on, "The Academy believes there should be an equal opportunity for every couple to access the economic stability and federal supports provided to married couples to raise children." In light of previous comments, I would suggest that children growing up without fathers, and to a much lesser extent mothers, is primarily an issue in the heterosexual community. If our intent is to protect a child's access to both a father and a mother, we should turn our attention to the decline of and disregard for the institution of marriage in our society as a whole. It is not a gay issue. I must confess that I'm surprised that this evening's conversation has become a religious debate rather than a legal one. I did not come prepared for that, and yet am obligated to respond to prior conversations in this area. Firstly, asserting that the Church is infallible and historically consistent is a stretch. One merely has to look at attitudes toward slavery, the rights of women, and most notably the Crusades to see that the Church has not always been a beacon for humanity. With regard to marriage, it only became a sacrament in 1215. Looking at the biblical record, we notice numerous things that would give us pause. Abraham and Sarah were siblings. And Old Testament law also required a man to sleep with his brother's wife if his brother died. It was also normal to have multiple wives. Witness Jacob being married to both Rachel and Leah, among others. It was normal to father children with your servants. We would characterize this as aberrant behavior in the modern church. Abraham and Hagar are perhaps the most notable example, the result serving as the origin of the conflict in the Middle East with his banishing of Hagar and Ishmael. And yet, surprisingly, he is called a friend of God. I would maintain that the treatment of the LGBT community represents another area where the church has fallen down. When we stand before the throne of God, we'll have to answer the question posed by Jesus in Matthew 25, where the goats are banished because they did not care for Jesus. They asked when they failed to do so, and Jesus replies, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me."
I'm going to ask if you can start to wrap it up a little, please.
Certainly. The church has a duty of care to all people. Let me skip down to a conclusion. We also need to evaluate our position in light of the universal love that was demonstrated by Christ for all people. He ate with prostitutes and sinners. He asked for a party with a tax collector. In every interaction with people, he sought to build them up and make them whole. It's interesting to note that the people he reserved his acerbic remarks for were the spiritual leaders, and that would be you and me. Despite repeated fervent returns to the topic, the issue at hand is not any disagreement between a religious, in this case Judeo-Christian, and civil definition of marriage, but rather a correct application of the current civil definition to all citizens. In closing, I would suggest that the issue of same-sex marriage should not be decided based on discomfort resulting from personal or even corporate religious or moral views, but rather based on a thoughtful consideration of the rights anticipated for all by our founding fathers. The responsibility for making the civil institution of marriage available to all rests with you, not a fearful electorate. You must have the courage to pass this legislation. Humbly submitted and with all due respect.
Are there any questions or comments? Senator Metz.
Yeah, with all due respect, I disagree with a lot of what you said. One thing that also Jesus did say was, "Go thy way and sin no more." Thank you.
May I reply?
Thank you.
May I reply to that, please?
Senator Archibald.
Just a quick comment, Mr. Reilly. Unlike Senator Metz, I agree entirely with everything you said, and brings up more of I think the maxim for Jesus, which was the golden rule: to love thy neighbor as you love thyself. Right? Do unto others as you want done unto yourself. Your testimony was refreshing at this late hour, and I very learned, and I appreciate it.
If I may just close with one thing in response to Senator Metz, and with regard to some comments made as to complying with the law. 1 Peter 2:13 says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority." So that is our role as churchmen. We may request so on and so forth, but we will submit to every human authority because that's what Jesus told us to do. Thank you.
And in John 14, it also says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Thank you.
Senator Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, good morning, Mr. Reilly. First, I'd like to welcome you, Mountain Laurel, being a constituent of mine, and I want to compliment both you and your daughter on your recitation of the question that's in front of this committee. Your daughter's statement, I thought, was very perceptive for a young lady her age. The only thing that sort of maybe did catch my attention is, being very careful to ascribe homophobic intentions to anybody who's opposing this, because you have certainly.
Oh, I would agree, and it was a direct quote, so I would not rewrite what she said. So
I certainly respect that.
That was texted to me, and those are her words.
And her contribution. And I would also agree with your observation that there's been a very religious bent to the testimony when we've been considering this bill. I was informed by your analysis. I found it refreshing to hear that in support of this legislation, but I think you're absolutely right. You know, we don't need it from either side. This is a question of rule of law, and thank you for pointing that out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. The next group of witnesses we're going to